Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk, the podcast where we break down storytelling across books, television, and film with a special love for book-to-screen adaptations. Here, we talk about craft, character arcs, structure, dialogue, visual language, and the creative choices that shape how a story lands. If you like thoughtful conversational deep dives into the stories you can't stop thinking about, you're in the right place. Let's talk.
Suffering from dry, tired, irritated eyes? Don't let dry eyes win. Use Sustain Pro. It hydrates, restores, and protects dry eyes for up to 12 hours. Sustain Pro. Triple action dry eye relief.
This will be my Outlander Season 8, Episode 6 review titled Blessed Are the Merciful. As always, if you are looking to avoid spoilers from the books or the TV show, please do keep on scrolling. So in the wake of Episode 5 and at the beginning of Episode 6, we find Captain Cunningham waking up on Claire's table in her surgery, and he is still unable to move his legs. When Claire finally enters the room, she tells him that he's fortunate to live to see another day, but he doesn't believe that she's actually there to help him. And because of his injuries, he's wet himself and still hasn't realized that he is paralyzed. This is when his mother Elspeth appears and asks Claire if she's ever seen anyone with this condition before. Claire, to her credit, is honest with her and says it's unlikely that he'll ever walk again, but beyond that, only time will tell. And Elspeth answers and says it usually does. Starting off this episode, which is titled Blessed Are the Merciful, with this scene between Captain Cunningham, Claire, and Elspeth is foreshadowing for the end of the episode and where that line in the book actually comes from. Jamie actually delivers the line, "Blessed are the merciful, for mercy shall be shown them," right before he gives Elspeth permission to bring Captain Cunningham back home to England. On the porch, Jamie and his men are discussing their plan over a dram, and Josiah tells Jamie that they rode as fast as they could and managed to cut the men from the 96 off at the border of the ridge. Evidently, there were only 20 or so of them, and they handled them. And Cleveland admits that that's because he took all of them out on his own. Cleveland tells Jamie that he now has nothing to fear any longer, and Buck and Jamie share a glance with one another that lets the other person know Cleveland is a little unhinged. He takes the opportunity to remind Jamie that he had warned him about Cunningham and that he wants to make a show of him by taking advantage of the fact that he's still alive and in his custody. This points out one of the main obstacles Jamie will be grappling with within the episode, and that is what to do about Cunningham. For Cleveland, though, he makes a point to remind Jamie that he didn't like the way that he spoke to him the last time they talked, and he would have been perfectly fine if Jamie had been taken by Cunningham. And so because he took care of that regiment of men, Jamie now owes him. This is exactly why Jamie had said he'd be making a deal with the devil in the previous episode. And so Buck and Josiah can tell that Cunningham is very dangerous to cross. And we know that Jamie feels the same way. And that is when Frank's voice returns and plays over the screen in Jamie's head, telling him, "It's your own fault. You knew his help would come with a price." The overlay of Frank's voice, once again, is a mixture in the show of direct text from the book and then also Jamie's own internal thoughts that he feels are now framed from the information he's getting from Frank's book. It's a clever way for us to be able to know what his inner dialogue is, but also continuously remind us as viewers that Frank's book is very much guiding him through a lot of his decision-making. When Cleveland walks away, Jamie calls out, "You have my word," and that's when he leaves the porch and enters into the surgery in order to talk to Cunningham. I loved the shot of his boots walking into the room because it highlights the fact that he's still able-bodied and about to converse with someone who is now paralyzed. And when Jamie enters the surgery, he asks Cunningham what he has to say for himself, and Cunningham asks where his men are. Jamie tells him that they're alive, awaiting their fates, and Cunningham asks Jamie if he would have his wife save him only so that he could have the cruel pleasure of seeing him put to death, and then asks if Jamie's going to kill him. As he does throughout the Outlander storyline, Jamie says he wouldn't be able to kill him strictly because Claire would not allow him to harm someone that is under her care. This is when Cunningham admits to the fact that he is no longer able-bodied or able to change his stars. This condition is as bad as death to him now. He had imagined an honorable death for himself, and that too now is gone and has been taken from him. I think for a moment, Jamie can agree that not being able to give yourself an honorable death would be very hard for someone like Cunningham or himself. But he makes a point to lean down and say to him that he has made his bed and now he must lay in it until Jamie can determine an appropriate fate for him. At the very least, this is another example of how Jamie, when needed, can be quite cutting. But at the end of the day, he does have a heart, and he's not going to make a rash decision based strictly on his emotions. He has a lot more at stake now, and he needs to think things through in a way that he can live with at the end of the day. It also makes it clear that for as much as Jamie had planned the confrontation at the lodge, he had not thought beyond it and what he would do with Cunningham. After that scene ends, we get the title card for the episode, which is this beautiful sunset shot of young Ian's son running through the grass. The shot itself is in slow-mo, so we can actually see him running alongside a dog, which we will later learn is related to Rollo, and it's also giving us a glimpse into the larger storyline of the episode that surrounds young Ian, Rachel, and Ian's first wife, Emily. Above the woods, we see Ian and Rachel traveling north together to New York. As a reminder, they had both left in order for Ian to see what has happened to his first wife and son after hearing that their village was attacked and burned. We see Ian standing looking out at the river, and he tells Rachel that he recognizes it. And when she approaches him with Augie, this is when Ian starts to share more of his experience with the Mohawk with her, including that of his marriage. Season 4 was so long ago that it's important that the show remind us all about his lived experience and how much it really did shape him and still informs much of his behavior and the man he's become. Rachel allows Ian to open up about Emily by telling him that she knows he loved her and that he can talk freely about her in front of Rachel. Ian admits that he does think about Emily now and then, and Rachel thinks that it's okay for him to, given all that they shared together, including a child, but she's clearly jealous, and Ian says that he knows they were not meant to be together, and Rachel is sorry for him given the circumstances. Ian then holds Augie and speaks to him in Mohawk, telling him, "I love you," in that language. And you can tell that it's upsetting Rachel. And I really loved the way that Rachel was portrayed in this episode and how the actress Izzy portrayed her, because she captured beautifully just how real and raw the emotion of jealousy can be when it's not rooted in something petty, but entirely in your love for another person. This is when we cut back to Savannah and catch up with Bree and Roger's storyline in the aftermath of the battle that Roger took part in. And we see Brianna reading the letter that he had written before the battle. And he explains what he wrote to her and why he felt so compelled to fight in that battle. He admits he felt compelled to fight after being at the camp, and it had given him a feeling of purpose and a renewed conviction. To him, he compares that feeling of going through the stones and feeling like he's being pulled apart to his conflicting emotions. And Bree tells him she doesn't want to hear it, but Roger asks her to listen to him because he needs to tell her. It's made him realize that he wants to be ordained. This is when he starts to describe the blast that sent him flying and remembering the feeling he had as a boy of being caught by his father in the tunnel the night that his mother died. He never knew how he was able to live through the bombing of the underground, but he remembered being caught by his father from the stairs and is putting together that because he saved his father when he sent him through the stones, as a result, his father was able to save him. This again is all taken from the novella A Wind on the Leaf of All Hallows, which is one of my absolute favorite ones, and if you have not read it, I highly recommend it. Roger then explains to Bree that this makes them a part of history, even though they didn't know they were a part of it yet. They couldn't change God's plan, but they were always a part of it. And so he knows that he's called to do the Lord's work and to be there in that time period. Bree supports his decision, and that's when Roger takes her to bed, which is when we finally get a hint that their third child from the source material will make an appearance before the series ends. That's when we cut back to the Continental camp and pick up the storyline with Ben and William, who had entered into this tent at the end of episode 5. Ben is rubbing his cheek after he's been punched in the face and tells William he deserved to have been punched. William then picks up a paper from his desk and finds the name Rafe Bleecker. This is the same name that's used in the source material, and it's quite funny when you're reading the book because William is absolutely gobsmacked from this and swears quite a bit about it in his own head. William calls him a coward for essentially killing his whole family with grief by faking his own death. And he asks Ben what would have made him turn his coat. That's when Ben asks him if he's heard of a man named Thomas Paine, who is a founding father. He had met him in a tavern in Philly, and when he was taken prisoner, he decided to read his pamphlet called Common Sense. In that pamphlet, they make the argument that the monarchy was oppressive, that self-governance was the key to prosperity in the New World, and Ben was convinced that the Americans were right. Despite going through all the proper avenues to make sure he wouldn't be discovered as alive, William had to go looking, and now he knew that he wasn't dead. As Ben explains why he decided to turn his coat and fake his own death, you can tell that William internally is struggling to justify how he could do this to his own family. And that's when he says to Ben that he wishes he had been dead. And to his credit, he's proving Ben's point. Because both Ben and William realize that if Hal Gray knew that his own son had turned his coat, he might die of shock, but also of disappointment. When William eventually brings up Amaranthus, Ben is ultimately surprised that he knows about her and realizes that Uncle John must have let her and Trevor stay with him. Initially, I think that William felt like it was a power move to bring up Amaranthus, but Ben ends up admitting that it was her idea for him to fake his death. And this realization ultimately wounds William so much that he accuses Ben of lying. You can see his internal thoughts spiraling here because of what we know just took place between him and Amaranthus in the episode before this. When William says he doesn't understand how Ben could leave his beautiful wife, Ben reminds him that it's none of his business, and then is suddenly on to him and questions why he would be comforting his own wife in her grief. This is when William's immaturity is on full display because, again, he's got his back against the wall and he goes for the low blow here and tells Ben, yeah, I've been comforting your wife in her grief. And the innuendo there is enough for them to start fighting again, and rightfully so, because William has undoubtedly crossed a line here. This is when we see the two of them wrestling one another before William is ultimately pulled off of Ben by his officers. He demands that William be taken to the guardhouse to be watched closely and held prisoner, and that's where we leave William before we cut back to Ian and Rachel in New York. The two of them are cooking themselves dinner when they're approached by one of Ian's Mohawk friends who tells them what had happened. Ian immediately warned not to go to the old village because there's only ashes left and it would only upset him. He also tells Ian that his own village is gone as well, and even though a lot of people escaped, most of them perished. Once he knows that Ian and Rachel are there in order to find out information about his wife, he tells Ian that there is somebody who may be able to help him find out their fates. We then cut back to the big house, where Jamie is sitting at a table writing, and Claire approaches him and starts to read over his shoulder. When he asks her if he's left anything out, Claire asks Jamie if he would really shoot the men on sight if they were to ever come back onto his land, and Jamie says yes. So this is how we know that he is now writing letters to the men that have betrayed him on the ridge. To Jamie's point, he knows people will watch to see how he reacts to this attack, and Claire asks what that then means for the wives and children of those men. At this point, Jamie is very much fueled by his anger, and so he's very curt about how he's going to handle the situation with the wives and men. The men wronged him, and therefore they must leave, and that means that their wives and children are included in that. He ends up referencing Bell, Book, and Candle, which is a quote from the book where Jamie writes to his tenants that they're all evicted from the land and should depart within 10 days. To Claire, this is when she tries to reintroduce some logic into this and can tell that he's operating with a lot of his emotion and not his logic. She plants the seed because we do see him move forward with these letters, write them all in this montage, and carry them out and deliver them to everybody that they are sent out to. We then get to hear Jamie reading the letter out loud that he sent out to all of these men. And it does warn that if they are to return after they are required to leave, they will be shot on sight. I did like this montage because it really hammers home the fact that if Jamie had to handwrite every single one of these letters, he had multiple opportunities while writing it over and over again to revise what he wanted to do, and he did not. His conviction was sound here. He had made this decision and was going to stick to it, which I think ultimately says a lot about how he handles things at the very end of the episode. He delivers Hiram Crombie's letter by hand, and this is in front of many people of the Ridge to set an example. But this is not from the book. Crombie is not a part of this list, nor is he used to make an example of in the source material. This show change is meant to come up with a conflict and give us a reason to side with these women, because we've now gotten to know Hiram Crombie as a character and we have a little bit more empathy towards him, which then hopefully should help you understand why Jamie is able to fold by the end of the episode. I love the shot when Hiram comes out and starts to babble on about how he regrets what happened at Lodge, and Jamie asking if that is an apology. Because the way it's shot and framed, Jamie's on the left, Hiram's on the right, and it puts Hiram's wife directly in the middle of the two of them. So it's foreshadowing again that this is going to be about her. Jamie asking if this is an apology is really highlighting how petty he feels about all of this. But we watch him put his foot down, and he tells him that the Beardsleys will take over the trading post and he has 10 days to leave. Jamie leaves Hiram looking at the emporium that he has built from scratch on Jamie's own land and has to sit with what he's done. And ultimately, that is the lesson that Jamie wanted to impart on him. Back in New York, we watch Rachel and Ian enter into an absolutely beautiful home to await the master who lives there. And we hear Ian and Rachel talking about a man named Joseph Brant, who has a foot in both worlds, as evidenced by his large and beautiful home. That's when we see Joseph Brant approaching the two of them with his wife, Catherine, and they all sit down together to talk. In the book, Ian's mother, Jenny, is actually with them when they travel to New York and speak with Joseph and Catherine. So again, omitting her from this storyline and not having her come to America changes a lot of the tone of this scene, because Jenny offers a lot of commentary and also comedy. As a historical figure, Joseph Brant is actually quite influential, and in the book he has a lot more of a lead up into explaining his significance during this war as compared to the show. Ian had been sent to meet him at Shadow Lake in season 7, but this is the first time we're actually seeing him on our screens. And in terms of historical context, he was an ally to the king who led his people against the rebel colonists during the war and was later granted territory in Canada and resettled there. They pick up quickly that Rachel is a Quaker, and they ask Ian if he is still with the Continentals. And Ian admits that their journey is because he had to find out what had happened with Emily. Joseph accuses him of joining them and leaving the Mohawk on purpose, but he clarifies that he didn't want to leave the Mohawk and that that was not the reason why he left. But ultimately, Joseph's opinion of Ian has been made before he even opens his mouth. His wife asks Rachel how she feels about that, and Rachel admits that the spirit has moved Ian to look for his wife and child, even though he doesn't address them as such, and he wants to know if he should mourn for them. She is allowing him to do that because he has felt so called to do it. They go back and forth over the violence inflicted against one another, and both Rachel and Catherine admit that it would be much simpler if the women were in charge of things. There's definitely a kinship formed between the two women, and you can tell that they have a lot in common and admire each other's spirit. This is when Catherine grants Ian the information that his wife is still living and is staying there with them, but Joseph does not allow Ian to see them and asks them to leave. Back at the Ridge, we see Jamie building a chair when he's approached by Mrs. Crombie, and she asks him for an audience. That's when we see all of the women and children behind her as she approaches him and starts to beg for mercy. Jamie then asks her to get up and if their husbands all put them up to this. At that point, she says no, their husbands actually forbade them. He reminds her that they are fools and traitors, taking a risk like that by siding with Cunningham, and she reminds Jamie that their husbands betrayed them all as well. She asks him again that they not be sent away for their husbands' actions, and Jamie knows that they cannot guarantee their husband's good behavior. I loved the framing of this shot where we have Jamie standing on the left and Mrs. Cunningham on the right, because it's putting them on equal footing with this visual break between them with the post of the porch. And it's foreshadowing of the overarching message of equality between them. Mrs. Crombie points out that surely Jamie must know what a wife might do to a man who has taken a roof from over his wife and children's heads. And it's in that sentiment that you can see Jamie soften here. Despite that, though, you hear him say that he cannot honor a contract with a man who would see him hanged. And despite his deep guilt, he watches the women leave But by lingering on Jamie's face and watching him mull over what just transpired between himself and the women, we can tell as viewers, because we know his character so well, that he is reconsidering. We see Ian and Rachel in the aftermath of their meeting with Joseph Brandt and his wife Catherine, and Ian begins to apologize to Rachel for bringing her here because he can now tell that he has pained her. Rachel, to her credit, says that she's okay, but Ian knows that she is lying, and that's when the floodgates finally open between these two and they're able to share their true feelings about what's actually going on here. For Rachel, she admits that she didn't think she'd feel this way, and she is ultimately a woman who's not immune to feelings. What it comes down to is wondering if Ian would have left Emily if he had had the choice. And Ian is honest and says he cannot say yes. So she knows that Ian would have been with Emily still if he had not been forced away from the Mohawk. Rachel says that she had prayed that Emily would still be alive because she knew that a ghost would insert itself into places that it was not wanted in their marriage. And Ian says that it's enough for him to know that they are alive and that they can go home now. This breakthrough conversation between the two of them I thought was really beautiful, and it also sets up the next scene that we will see between them again in such a really impactful way because it shows Rachel's emotional intelligence and maturity level here in a way that speaks volumes without it having to be written so clearly on screen or verbalized between the two of them. Back at the Continental camp, William is inside of this cage that he is being held prisoner in, and we see Rachel's brother, Denzel, coming in to look after him. I always love when a show does this where we see one character and then cut to their other half or their partner on screen. And for Rachel, for us to see her and then immediately go to her brother is a really nice segue. Denzel is one of my favorite, more underrated characters of the show, and especially in this season, I think they're utilizing him in a really great way. He provides a comedy here that I think is perfect, examining William, pretending that he needs to bend over and asks the private to send away for a bucket of water in order to free up a moment for him to speak openly with William. He is going to help him escape from the Continental camp, and so the two of them come up with this plan where Denzel will fake his death because he had smallpox, and then William can escape in the night. In the book, Denzel is married to William's cousin Dottie, and they have removed her from the storyline, so I don't know if we're going to see Denzel again or wrap up his storyline in the remaining episodes of the show, but I hope we do because he's a really impactful person and I think a beautiful character, and I do hope he gets a proper send-off here. But at the very least, William admits that he wants to see Denzel at the other side of the war, and I think that should be foreshadowing to seeing him at the end of the season in some way. We cut back to Savannah, but this time we're actually going to be with Fergus's family and not going to Lord John's house. And we are first tipped up to that fact with this image of the frog, because again, the French are called frogs. Henri Christian is sitting outside playing with this frog when he is approached by Roger, asking if Fergus is inside. The show has given Henri Christian a lot of screen time, mainly because there is a very important plot point that involves his character, and we can't be invested in that unless we spend proper time with the character of Henri Christian himself. So again, this is foreshadowing for scenes to come. It's just a little snippet of context so that we have a face to the name and we feel invested in his character. And we also see that he has an interest in what his father Fergus is doing as well, which is important as we move through the story. Fergus comes outside with a letter from Roger's comrades in arms, and Bree approaches the group, and they discover that it's a letter from Francis Marion, who originally had denied their request for guns, but is now saying he will provide them after Roger's help and actions in the battle. This was another scene that I was a little confused as to why they had it take place in this particular location, given that the three of them are so obviously trying to not let people around them hear what they are talking about, and yet they continue to stand outside in front of this print shop, which Fergus is already getting harassed for, and openly discuss their plans. That's when we cut back again to the home of Joseph Brandt, where we see that Rachel has gone back to meet with him alone. She begs him to allow Ian to see his wife and child, and makes it clear that the fact that Emily has his son is not well known. It is a secret. She admits to him that she's jealous, but does not wish to be consumed by that jealousy. And while she fears that Ian and Emily may still love one another, she doesn't know how to move on without Ian being able to see his own son. And Brant did not realize this, but once he does, he can see that Rachel does not want to stand between Ian and his own child. That fact alone allows him to grant Rachel that kindness and, by extension, grant Ian the kindness of seeing Emily and his son. This scene in particular and the dialogue within it is some of my favorite of this episode, and I really think that it's a moment where Izzy, the actress who plays Rachel, was allowed to really shine and showcase her skills here because she's so real and raw in this scene, and I think that you can feel sympathy for her, but also empathy for her, and understand exactly the emotions that she's been toiling and battling with for the duration of their journey up into New York, but also from the moment she read the news that Emily and Ian's son might have perished in that fire. And that sentiment is the through line that carries us through these scenes, where we see Jamie now at the big house watching the children helping Claire with the bees. We can see in this moment Jamie realizing how much joy it brings him to see the kids helping Claire and watch his wife on their property, on their land, and he feels guilt over the women that he would be putting out alongside their children. And while we don't get the conversation between Jamie and Claire that takes place ahead of Lodge, we just cut to Jamie and Claire walking into Lodge and this meeting that they've clearly called. It's implied that the two of them have come to this resolution jointly because that's the type of a relationship that they have and are now using in order to impress upon these women that their lives can be handled in a different way and they can have autonomy and independence from their husbands. He tells the men and the women in that room that he will revoke the letter of banishment, but the contracts he made with the gentlemen remain void. From here on, he will address their wives and deal directly with them instead. And he reminds them that no one is forcing them to stay on their land. The men do not have to be there, but the women want to stay. And he will not have men on his land who plot against him. So instead, he'll write new contracts with the women, which make them responsible for the rents, and the land is now theirs and not his. Anyone who fails to meet the agreed upon contract will have to answer to Jamie, and the women gladly accept here. And I love that every time we are in Lodge, we get this wide angle shot where we can see over Jamie's shoulder and get a full scope of who's in that room. And in this particular scene, it's especially impactful that all the women are standing in front of the men. They're being directly addressed, and they are given all of the control in the outcome of this situation. Claire and Jamie look at each other so fondly in this moment, but I think for Claire it's important because this is something she brought up to him a while ago now, and he arrived at this conclusion on his own, but she can tell that he listens to her, and that's the most important part of this entire thing. For a long time, essentially since he's met Claire, Jamie has been a man who listens to his wife and values her opinion and knows that she is intelligent and smart and worth listening to and considering in all matters of his affairs. For him to then impart the same kindness onto these women and allow them to have control over their own futures would have been hugely impactful, but also questioned quite heavily at the time because this is not the norm. For a story and a couple that has always emphasized that they cannot tell if they are impacting history or the future, this is a small example of how the ripple effects would happen for them. Even though this is so tiny, it would be impressed upon these people of this era so much so that it might shape and inform future thinking that isn't already present. Claire tells Jamie he did the right thing, and he admits that it could easily go sideways, but it lightens his heart to do it. And that's when Elspeth Cunningham approaches them. This is the moment where the blessed are the merciful line comes back, so we echo that from the beginning of the show and get the dialogue taken directly out of the book, along with Elspeth asking if Jamie is still feeling generous. She knows that her son cannot remain on Fraser's Ridge, and Jamie knows that she cannot take care of him alone at her age. Despite that, she wants to take him home to England, to a place that she knows if she's going to spend the final years of her life taking care of him. And so she asks Jamie to grant her and Charles that kindness. And ultimately, like so many times before, all it takes is Claire to look at him for him to grant her permission. We go back to Joseph Brant's home, and we see that Ian and Rachel are there to meet with Emily. And Catherine is putting white flowers into a vase, which Rachel points out are for peace. They thank her once again for allowing this meeting to take place. And that is when the door opens and we start to realize that Ian is about to be reunited with this woman after not seeing her for years and then worrying for presumably months that both her and his own child perished in a fire. The shot that they use in order to convey that is over the shoulders of Rachel and Ian, and we can see through a very narrow gap in the door behind Joseph Brandt that Emily is approaching him. So again, it keeps her hidden from us as viewers for a while so that the suspense can build. What I also love about the camera work here is that we then flip views and we get to see what Emily would be looking at as she walks through the door with Ian and Rachel and their child standing opposite her. And the looks on their faces are very telling because I think for both of them, this is like seeing a ghost. When Emily enters, she does it very slowly and her hands are in front of her chest. She looks very guarded and unsure about what exactly this conversation is going to look like and end like. But very quickly, Ian turns his entire torso to face her, which basically presents himself as being open to having this conversation, and he asks if he's a stranger to her. Emily then calls him a stranger she thinks that she knows. This is when she starts to piece together that Ian is not here alone and wants to be introduced to Rachel and Augie. Rachel very quickly says that she's heard a lot about Emily and their son together, and Emily can tell now that Rachel is in on this secret. It doesn't have to be hidden from her. They can talk openly about their own son, and this is when she opens up and says she has been changed by sorrows since her husband died. She has been having terrible dreams about the war, and now Ian is here, and for her that is an omen. She dreamt of their son being captured by soldiers who are cruel to him and who force him to fight in a battle where he is killed. And at the end of her recap of her dreams, she very abruptly asks Ian to take him to live with them. I really love John Bell's expression here because you can tell not only is he deeply troubled by this dream, but then it hits him right in the solar plexus that she's asking such a big thing of him, and she says it's because she knows he will be safer with Ian. This is when she turns her attention to Rachel and asks if she will allow it, and if she will take her son at her fire. And Rachel, to her credit, without hesitation, says, of course. You can immediately tell that Emily is relieved by this, and so she leaves to go retrieve their son together, and we can see Ian and Rachel left standing in this room alone with the weight of what has just transpired between them. In from the door, we see Swiftest of Lizards approach baby Augie with a puppy in his arms, and he offers his little brother, the dog, which we find out is actually an offspring of Rollo. At some point, Swiftest of Lizards would have been told that he had a sibling by Ian and Rachel, and so he immediately addresses him as brother. I really loved this entire scene because not only do we have the continuity of the same young child actor playing Swiftest of Lizards, but I feel like having this representation of Rollo in one way or another on the show is also going to be a really nice way to kind of close the loop of that storyline by the end of this season. And when Ian asks his son if he still remembers him, Swiftest of Lizards says that he does, which must have been really impactful for Ian, who probably had been navigating his life assuming that his own son would not know or remember him. He immediately runs over to Rachel and kisses her hand. And so again, it's made clear here that he had been briefed by his mother prior to this conversation about what was going to happen between them. And so he's entering that room already knowing that he will be going home with them and that this woman is going to be taking care of him from here on out. Rachel tells Emily that she is honored that she is entrusting her with her son and that she will love him as though he was her own. And you know, watching Rachel, that is true in every sense of the word for her. Emily is clearly emotional and asks to say goodbye to her son one last time. And so we see the two of them break away and she is able to tell him to be brave and be good for them and that she loves him deeply. And you can almost feel her heart breaking in this scene. I cannot imagine what this would be like for her to have been tormented by bad dreams for so long, worrying about him so deeply, knowing that he is only getting older and that the war is headed in one direction. She is also traumatized by what just happened at her village. And so the relief and also pain that she must feel in watching Ian and Rachel take her son away from her and into this world that she is not familiar with but has grown to hate because they have attacked her own people is really contradictory within herself. Ultimately, I think the fact that she trusts Ian so much to do this for her and for their child is the most loud thing about this whole scene. She trusts him implicitly, even though she is giving her son to a man that will be walking in a different lane than the Mohawk way. That ultimately means that her son is going to learn different customs and move away from his Mohawk traditions and ultimately become someone who's living in that new world. And that's a huge sacrifice. She asks that she be afforded the opportunity to help name their son because Ian had named her son for her. And so she walks over to the baby, who at this point, again, they've been calling Augie because they could not think of a name. And she immediately thinks of one. And we get this really sweet shot over her shoulder with her hand on his head, cradling his head and looking at this child that has this whole world in front of him and all these opportunities ahead. And in the same breath, she is letting her own son go. She tells Rachel and Ian that their son's name will be Hunter, which of course for Rachel in particular is especially impactful and also seems kismet that she would come up with that name without knowing that that's Rachel's maiden name. It's a really beautiful way to end this scene, to see off the character of Emily at the end of this season, and also set up this new dynamic of their family as a family of four, and also with this new dog. And just as we're watching the goodbye take place between Emily and Swiftest of Lizards, we start to fade into the big house scene where we're watching another goodbye take place. This time it is between Claire and Elspeth, who is leaving for England with her son, Captain Cunningham. This means that Jamie formally gave her permission to take him away and leave the Ridge and head back to England on their own accord. And I think for Jamie, watching this man who is now paralyzed being carted away by his elderly mother, it must bring him some form of comfort or internal peace to know that he did not inflict more pain onto this person. Elspeth then comes up to Claire, and again we have this really great shot that shows our two characters in side profile. So we have Claire on the left and Elspeth on the right. And I also like that their costuming is opposite of one another. So Claire has a white shirt on and Elspeth is still dressed in her all black. So again, it's that yin and yang of their relationship dynamics that we've seen play out over the course of these 6 episodes in a very obvious visual language. The two women clearly have a great amount of respect for one another, and in their exchange, you can see that coming across. And the two of them agree that in another lifetime, they may have been great friends, but as it is, they must say farewell. Elspeth asks Claire if she was considered a friend or an enemy to her, and we see them joining hands with one another. And I thought that this was just really tender and did a great job of taking what was on the page in the book and really bringing it to life in a very palpable way. Because when Claire says, friend, I always considered you a friend, Elspeth kisses her hands and then leaves to go off on her way with her son. We see Jamie watching them from up on the porch and then stand beside Claire while the two of them ride away together. And Jamie admits to her that Cunningham's departure does not mean that all of their troubles have gone away. Ferguson is still out there, and the looming threat of the Battle of King's Mountain is also still out there, and he knows that that man is going to play a part in that. And as we saw at the beginning of the episode, Jamie is now operating with this looming threat constantly running in his head. And now that he's able to figure out who the key players are in that equation, it's constantly eating away at him. And so we watch them re-enter the big house, and seemingly things have changed, but for these two, they know that what's coming is coming, and they still don't have an answer for how they're going to handle the Battle of King's Mountain